Hello and welcome from the Global Tech Advocates Future of Work group. As part of our Uncovered series, today we're exploring workplace design. Adapting where and how we work calls for a whole new repertoire of expertise, from seamless technology, ventilation and lighting, through to the physical attributes of office space. I'll hand over to my colleague, Louise Barfield, who will introduce our expert speaker, Michael Fern, the Executive Director of Edge Architecture and Design.
Thanks, Jan. Hi, it's good to be here today to talk about a very creative subject, but also one that's very topical. And to introduce Michael, first of all, Michael Fern is Executive Director, as you said, of Edge, a London-based design and architectural practice. And in his work, he's a forward-thinking design strategist with a real love of his subject. He injects ideas, innovation, and creative direction at every critical stage of projects, inspiring both clients and colleagues. Michael is an all-rounder, working closely with his fellow directors and the leadership of multidisciplinary teams, working across different sectors, from retailers to landowners, and also is passionate about finding the best creative and business solution, because often those are commercial briefs for every project, drawing on his wide frame of cultural and design references. So good to meet you, Michael. And I suppose to kick off really, as this is a time of change, what have you seen from your client work? How our workspaces are adapting, and what are the key changes that you've seen?
Thank you, first of all, for inviting me on today. And I think it's really timely that we're sitting here in a week where several global businesses have actually just released their return to the office strategies. It's Apple's second attempt, and they've gone for something which is slow and gradual. And rather spectacularly, Goldman Sachs announced their strategy, and only 50% of their workers adhered to the policy, which was a mandate to return 5 days a week. So although there was this kind of notion of a great resignation, and that has happened to a greater or lesser extent, I think that some were predicting or potentially hoping for a stampede back to the office. I think if the last week has actually shown us anything, that many are yet to be convinced by the benefit of actually returning to work. I think that's actually brought about by, I suppose, the last 18 months, 2 years. We've had this kind of collective awakening brought on by the pandemic, which has really kick-started some serious discussion and debate around the importance of the office. I think primarily as part of a tool of a broader understanding of where work happens, rather than the place where work gets done and it being the only place where work gets done. I think early conversations for us and some of our clients were literally the first to ring up the phone and actually say, you know, we need a strategy about how to get people back in a safe and secure way. But actually for many, the conversation quickly turned into thoughts around the workplace feeling liberated, much more freer, a little bit more flexible, more choice and autonomy. But I think as we settled into that new routine and the new way of life that became the various lockdowns and pandemic, we actually started to see some of the kind of the drawbacks of that. And as the hyperboles died down, we've started to get a much more forensic idea of an understanding of why the office is an important tool rather than what it was as a physical space. I think what's really starting to kind of come out now is this shift from something which was around personal preference to organizational and collective benefit. So we're really trying to understand at quite a granular level why a visit to the office is important. And we really have started to kind of work with some pioneering clients. We just completed the head office for Joules, the clothing retailer up in Market Harborough, conceived 2018, 2019, pre-pandemic, headcount of potentially 500 people. Mm-hmm. We were actually on site and continued on site through lockdown. And actually through the course of lockdown, there was a change in HR strategy, which effectively turned the business into something which was around remote first. So really trying to encourage people to use the head office as a strategic tool rather than the only place to do work. I think what's actually started to happen though, as those pioneering companies have started to test those strategies, is to really understand does remote first work in every instance? There's been lots of talk about asynchronous working, but the challenge around that has been around what is the collective knowledge and insight for the organization? How do we harness that when we are not working in the same space at the same time? And really starting to try and question why the office is an important tool. And importantly for us, insight's starting to show that actually there's something which is much more around moments of human connection and shared value and behavior, rather than the physical process of actually completing a task.
Interesting you mentioned that the human factors though, but do you design those in then? You talked about forensics. Does that mean that you have to unpick the reasons why and actually the sort of benefits in terms of how things appear or feel when you go in?
Absolutely, and that's a whole scale review. I think primarily what we're trying to do is, I suppose, elicit a series of behaviours which is often aligned behind what a brand is trying to articulate. And everyone understands the consumer face of brand, and broadly we understand what the employer brand is about. But really, I don't think that many traditional workplace companies really trying to understand how to unlock the potential that all of the various moments within a workplace setting can unlock and enhancing the performance of what the brand stands for. What I kind of thought would be a really interesting way of, I suppose, kind of bringing that to life is to step outside of work and think about other areas of our life where we are very, very in tune with how brand behaviors and brand advocacy and loyalty come to light, and almost use that as a tool to, I suppose, kind of then, as we do for our clients, is, I suppose, map that experience and understand where we can spot the weaknesses and strengths in an experience. We've done that both pre and post pandemic, but before we kind of return back to work, I just kind of wanted to focus on something which in theory we should all know inside out, and that's the process of buying an ice cream. So I use that as because it's something that's universally understood, as was work in its basic form. We were approached by a global ice cream company and had the enviable task of trying to understand why an ice cream brand wasn't working. And by wasn't working, it wasn't necessarily generating the sales, it wasn't getting people visiting in the numbers that they thought it would. And I suppose kind of when you look at it on the surface of things, it should have been straightforward. They got an ice cream product which was iconic and known certainly throughout Europe, but most of the Western world. They got amazing toppings and they were on the streets of most European capital cities. However, when we got the feedback from their customers, it was almost unanimous in the themes that it actually brought up. And fundamentally, the top or the bottom line was it just wasn't a happy experience. Now, buying an ice cream should be a joyous occasion. However, how can you turn something so joyous into something that was not hitting the mark? When we unpack that, and this is where I suppose the parallels with what we're looking at with our workplace, and back to your idea of kind of forensic analysis, we looked at this from I suppose the kind of consumer view. So we took off our critical analysis as experts and shopped the experience. We also served in the ice cream store to understand both sides of the equation. First off, the menu is too complicated. And actually it stressed people out in trying to decipher choice. The next thing was around the whole ceremony of actually how you made your ice cream and what you saw the person behind the counter doing. It was hidden. And that actually, the feedback was that created challenges around trust. Are you actually getting what you asked for? Is it going to turn up and it's not got the ingredients I wanted? And one of the most important ones and one of the big difficulties is you actually paid after you'd got the product in your hand. So if you've ever tried to take change, get an ice cream cup in your hand and a spoon, and the only thing you really want to do is take your first mouthful of ice cream, but you can't because you don't have three hands. So the final crux of it was to say this was a happy experience. Service wasn't given with a smile. So I suppose kind of the reason for laying it out like that and thinking about that kind of pre-visit expectation, the process of interaction, and then the kind of moment of fulfillment if we think about that experience and then kind of map the idea of where were the strengths and weaknesses, they become pretty clear because you've articulated them in quite simple terms. Often what we're interested in doing is, I suppose, mapping that experience as a visitor, as a user, as a casual attendee, as a consultant, as a collaborator for our clients.
So
And actually, when you lay out, sorry.
So no, I was just going to ask that. So it's not the building that is the brand; it's the way that people interact with the space that you happen to work in. And
absolutely.
Online, but also you're using UX experience, aren't you, in terms of actually the interaction? So those moments of disconnect, then, if you're having an ice cream and it doesn't actually measure up, would apply in the same way. So when you have that mind of looking forward to seeing your team, looking forward to going to the office or working in a space together, is that the sort of anticipation you mean?
Yeah, 100%. And I suppose you kind of, if you think pre-visit, how do I check in? How do I know where I'm going? You know, if you're anything like me, I wake up most mornings, and unless my phone tells me where I'm supposed to be, I don't know. I get to buildings, I often have to go through security clearance and check in on the ground floor before I then go to the floor and repeat the process with the reception of the company that I'm with. You know, if I'm late, that makes me even more stressed out and potentially even more late. Is the technology frictionless? You know, we've all suffered that pain of getting through the door of a company to go into a meeting room and you can't connect. The cable isn't there, the click share doesn't work. The Wi-Fi code doesn't work, or you basically have got restricted access, which means you can't connect to any of the files you need.
Yeah.
And if we kind of take that into its broadest sense and actually question the notion of, do I actually need a desk to complete the task in hand, or are there other reasons why I'm there? So almost kind of broadening things out and thinking much more around an environment which is about sustaining moments of human connection. So what's the quality of the coffee like? What's the ambience like? Are the noise levels good? And by noise levels, sometimes positive noise is better than silence. We've all, you know, if you try and have a private conversation in a library, no one would ever think about it, but we all go to coffee shops and have potentially quite confidential meetings in public, because there's a hubbub of noise, and that means that it feels like we're in a safe space and a safe environment. So what we're really trying to do when we map an experience across a workspace is really think about all those functional and emotional values and what's the intent that we want. Once we understand the intent from how we design a space, we can then actually design the physical parameters. And increasingly, this is less about it looks cool or it looks good. I suppose those are prerequisites. It's always got to look kind of relevant and purposeful and supportive of what the organizational culture and the brand is about. But fundamentally, we're trying to elicit some human behaviors. Fundamentally, we're trying to get to some really insightful things that we do know and are measured, quantifiable facts. Happier workers and happier organizations have more productivity. They've got lower attrition rates in their staff. And when you go on, you know, places like Glassdoor, it's self-evident. The ones that have got really high scores, you know, the kind of 4s to 5s, 5-star reviews, are all conversations where they've got very powerful brand advocates. That's someone that's prepared to go and tell the positive message about why I should work there, rather than the negativity around the reasons why you should never work in this place again.
So you're making culture tangible, then, aren't you, by anticipating, but also building it through that interaction. So is the idea of a head office then? Head office actually what happens in your head, literally. That, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really lovely way. Yeah, I mean, that's a really nice notion. I mean, one of the thoughts that we've got, and really what we're trying to advocate for lots of our clients, is around the physical workspace is a manifestation of your brand purpose and your brand culture and your brand idea. And really, I suppose when you have large organizations, you need more people to behave in a collective way, which supports the top line objective of the brand. And in those instances, we are really trying to get this common idea of ways of working, of cultural expectations that really do start to kind of power the organization. I think this is where you get those huge disconnects, you know, where you've got a CEO in the likes of someone like Goldman Sachs saying, I want everyone back, and everyone's saying, I don't want to come back. What you've not done is you've not created a positive pull. You're trying to push people, you're trying to force people. The more you try and force people into an experience, the more they're going to challenge and reject it. And really what we're trying to do is get to a position where our employees of the organizations we work for, the organization itself sees the collective value and benefit in what a return to physical workspace might be. If you think about it in that, I suppose, a quantifiable way, if the workplace equates for, and the people cost is potentially 70% of your total business costs, then we should be doing more to make sure that that high number in terms of business operation costs is rewarded by creating a space that allows them to perform at their best. I had a really good quote recently, which was around talking about leadership, but it was talking about athletes and coaches and the symbiosis of effectively you need a really good coach, but you also need a really willing athlete to understand the collective benefit of how they get the best out of each other. And really, I suppose what we're trying to do is, how do we cultivate that? That's something that's been challenging over the last 18 months, 2 years. Although, we're sat here on a Zoom call now, having something which feels quite second nature. The reality is, I'm sat in a spare room. I don't have the quality of air levels I would get into in a corporate workplace environment. Therefore, I feel an afternoon slump. I don't get the right light levels, so I'm fine now in just this time of day. But by the evening time, work becomes harder for me because I'm not equipped in a way that I would be, if I was in a full environment that was taken care of by my company and my organization.
So which brands or which organizations are already future-proofing their organization then? Are there examples that you've seen you're thinking that is definitely the way forward?
Yeah, it's a good challenge. I mean, we're working for a very large tech company with a very iconic social presence, and they are taking the decision to effectively amalgamate 3 locations into one effectively huge campus operation. When you look at the amenities and facilities which are in that space, it far exceeds anything that they have in each one of their locations now. So they're playing with that balance and understanding that the moments of human connection is much greater in the space that they're creating. We, at the same time, have got some long-standing relationships with the likes of Accenture and KPMG, where we're looking at their portfolios, where their internal model is shifting quite dramatically, removing lots of internal meeting spaces because most meetings are conducted online. In the space of that, we're implementing more spaces which is around solo focus and solo and small group working. So better acoustic performance, removing some of the kind of the clutter that you get from when you do go into a physical workspace, but also realizing they may not be able to do that at home. So for us, it's those that I suppose kind of leaning into the challenge, really starting to understand at a much more kind of granular level how to create the right optimum levels of, I suppose, kind of functions and amenities that we all expected from a workplace, but all the emotional cues about how do we get more people to behave in a way that supports their task in hand or the overall business objectives.
Interesting. And you think they're prepared because they've not just invested in that mapping that you mentioned earlier, but actually looking ahead. People need flexibility, both flexibility of space, but also that autonomy of actually, well, I'll work when I'm needed. I'll be productive at certain points when the team needs me, or as a leader when I need to galvanize people together. So there's a different pattern of work, and your role is to basically design around those different patterns.
Yeah, absolutely. And in each one of those settings, and I suppose kind of make sure we're delivering a series of practical requirements, but also the enablers of space. So, as I mentioned, much more dynamic lighting control, mood setting, the use of music, and in certain instances we're using sensory engagement consultants to look at the use of smell within space
Really?
as a way of being able to kind of, I suppose, create a feeling of togetherness or relaxation or warmth and connection. Because, you know, I suppose we're sensory beings, aren't we? At the end of the day, we've evolved over millennia to actually witness things, and it evokes reactions in each other. So, you know, we release serotonin and dopamine when we witness certain things, and our bodies react in different ways when we see things happen around us. And I suppose the slight disconnects you get from, you know, I suppose kind of reading human emotions over Zoom and over Teams, whilst it's good, and I think the idea of losing some of that and going back to just audio calls is a thing of the past. I do think that there is a role of where we need to actually still reconvene and connect, and increasingly I suppose our traditional sectors of workplace, retail, leisure and hospitality are starting to blend and merge much more into one canvas. So the idea of the workplace itself as a series of landscapes of settings and environments that allow you to kind of be more together and focused when you need to, but also giving you the isolation and the kind of individual focus time too.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that you've combined both the sort of consumer, you know, the user focus, and then actually the intricacy of actually what buildings are for, and then all those added values, the benefits, as you said, that actually smart organizations will think either if they can't do it as a village, like maybe Jules have done with their head office, they'll collaborate with other like-minded companies in a building and create that sort of village, and put maybe that they pipe in Greg's or something or coffee at certain times, you know, to make people go for lunch. But it's, I mean, do you think, are you optimistic about the future? Do you think things are just going to get better?
Yeah, I wouldn't be doing what I didn't otherwise. I think, I suppose the reality of it is we're quite fortunate in the fact that we, you know, I suppose we have some really high level conversations with clients that are around much more long-term ideas around how they want to view space. You know, we mentioned Jules, that's a 25-year commitment on that building. They didn't see them outgrowing it in the next 25 years. So these are not short-term decisions. And I suppose that's where, you know, we see there's some real value in building relationships for the future. You know, you mentioned that the village, and it reminds me of 22 Bishopsgate. You know, we worked on some of the consulting for Sir Stuart Lipton on you know, effectively the largest building in the city cluster. And that mindset there was around promoting this notion of kind of like birds of a feather will flock together, and within a vertical village. And if that building theoretically is in full occupation, that's 12,000 people, and that is a small town, you know, and that needs its own hospitality, it needs its own, you know, sports activities, it needs communal gathering spaces. And what you start to find is you know, the subcultures and the subsets within each one of those teams. You know, the tech guys might be on an incubator lab on level 7, but, you know, you've got the gym on level 21, and you've got a holistic well-being and you know, your morning yoga classes, and in the basement, you know, you've got one of the largest cycle stores within any building. So I suppose this idea about, you know, whether you are in a fortunate position where you have a large enough, I suppose, canvas to be able to do your own thing, like Jules and some of our other large corporate clients, or you work within a multi-occupancy building, which gives you an inherent kind of landscape within the built environment already has those amenities plugged in, and what you're doing is really providing choice for those organizations, and also for those individuals. You know, the more we can do with that free time within a day, and, you know, the strategy on a tall building, you potentially lose 20 minutes of your lunch hour by moving up and down the building. If you can do something else with that 20 minutes that adds value to your day, then that seems like a no-brainer. And we're seeing that as a positive impact, that more organizations are realizing that there is a benefit in investing in that for the long-term well-being and happiness of their staff.
Interesting. Well, we could talk for hours. I'm sure there are lots of ideas that can come through, but thank you. It's been really fascinating to hear about the challenges that you're currently facing, but also those that you're thinking of in the future and how people have got to build that in. And it sounds like you're going to have a very active next phase of development as well. Thank you. Thanks, Michael, for your time and for all the insights that you shared. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Over to you, Jan. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much. If anybody would like to learn more about the Tech London Advocates, please go to techlondonadvocates.org.uk to find out about the working groups there. And thank you again, Michael and Louise, and goodbye. Thank you.